Surviving a deadly plane crash would be considered by many to be a miracle. But for some survivors of such a devastating event, the crash was only the beginning of a horror story not even Hollywood could come up with. Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, later known as Andes flight disaster, was a chartered flight that originated in Montevideo, Uruguay, bound for Santiago, Chile. On October 13, 1972, while crossing the Andes, the aircraft began descending too early to reach Putahuel Airport, and struck a mountain, initially shearing off both wings and the tail section. The remaining portion of the fuselage slid down the mountain about 2,379 feet before striking ice and snow on a glacier. The flight was carrying 45 passengers and crew, including 19 members of the Old Christians Club rugby union team, along with their families, supporters, and friends. The wreck was located at an elevation of 11,710 feet in the remote Andes Mountains in far western Argentina, near the border with Chile. 3 crew members and 8 passengers died immediately, and several others died soon afterward due to the frigid temperatures and their serious injuries. Authorities immediately began searching for the aircraft and flew over the crash site several times during the next few days, but could not see the white fuselage against the snow. Search efforts were cancelled after 8 days. During the next 72 days, 13 more passengers died. The remaining survivors reluctantly resorted to cannibalism. Nando Parado and Roberto Canessa climbed a 15,260 feet mountain peak without gear and hiked for 10 days into Chile. On December 23, 1972, 72 days after the crash, 16 survivors were rescued. Members of the amateur Old Christians Club rugby union team from Montevideo, Uruguay, were scheduled to play a match against the Old Boys Club, an English rugby team in Santiago, Chile. Club president Daniel Want chartered a Uruguayan Air Force twin-turboprop Fairchild FAH-227 to fly the team over the Andes to Santiago. The aircraft carried 40 passengers and 5 crew members. The aircraft departed Carrasco International Airport on October 12, 1972, but a storm front over the Andes forced them to stop overnight in Mendoza, Argentina. The weather on 13th of October also affected the flight. On that morning, conditions over the Andes had not improved but changes were expected by the early afternoon. The pilot waited and took off at 2:18 p.m. on Friday 13th of October from Mendoza. Pilot Ferradas had flown across the Andes 29 times previously. On this flight he was training co-pilot Legara, who was the pilot in command. As they flew through the Andes, clouds obscured the mountains. The aircraft, FAU 571, was 4 years old and had 792 airframe hours. The aircraft was regarded by some pilots as underpowered, and had been nicknamed by them as the lead sled. Given the cloud cover, the pilots were flying under instrument meteorological conditions at an altitude of 18,000 feet, and could not visually confirm their location. While some reports state the pilot incorrectly estimated his position using dead reckoning, the pilot was relying on radio navigation. At Plankin Pass, the aircraft still had to travel 37 to 43 miles to reach Curacao. Inexplicably, at 3:21 p.m., shortly after transiting the pass, Legara contacted Santiago and notified air traffic controllers that he expected to reach Curacao a minute later. The flight time from the pass to Curacao is normally 11 minutes, but only 3 minutes later the pilot told Santiago that they were passing Curacao and turning north. He requested permission from air traffic control to descend. The controller in Santiago, unaware the flight was still over the Andes, authorized him to descend to 11,500 feet. Later analysis of their flight path found the pilot had not only turned too early, but turned on a heading of 014 degrees, when he should have turned to 030 degrees. As the aircraft descended, severe turbulence tossed the aircraft up and down. Nando Parado recalled hitting a downdraft, causing the plane to drop several hundred feet and out of the clouds. The rugby players joked about the turbulence at first, until some passengers saw that the aircraft was very close to the mountain. That was probably the moment when the pilots saw the black ridge rising dead ahead. The pilot applied maximum power in an attempt to gain altitude. Witness accounts and evidence at the scene indicated the plane struck the mountain either 2 or 3 times. The next collision severed the right wing. Some evidence indicates it was thrown back with such force that it tore off the vertical stabilizer in the tail cone. When the tail cone was detached, it took with it the rear portion of the fuselage, including 2 rows of seats in the rear section of the passenger cabin, the galley, baggage hold, vertical stabilizer, and horizontal stabilizers, leaving a gaping hole in the rear of the fuselage. 3 passengers, the navigator, and the steward were lost with the tail section. The final impact against a snowbank crushed the cockpit and the 2 pilots inside, killing Ferradas. The official investigation concluded that the crash was caused by controlled flight into terrain due to pilot error. Of the 45 people on the aircraft, 3 passengers and 2 crew members in the tail section were killed when it broke apart. At least 4 died from the impact of the fuselage hitting the snowbank, which ripped the remaining seats from their anchors and hurled them to the front of the plane. Pilot Ferradas died instantly when the nose gear compressed the instrument panel against his chest, forcing his head out the window. Co-pilot Legara was critically injured and trapped in the crushed cockpit. He asked one of the passengers to find his pistol and shoot him, but the passenger declined. The Chilean Air Search and Rescue Service was notified within the hour that the flight was missing. 4 planes searched that afternoon until dark. The news of the missing flight reached Uruguayan media about 6 p.m. that evening. Officers of the Chilean SARS listened to the radio transmissions and concluded the aircraft had come down in one of the most remote and inaccessible areas of the Andes. They called on the Andes Rescue Group of Chile. Unknown to the people on board or the rescuers, the flight had crashed about 13 miles from Hotel Termas, an abandoned resort in hot springs that might have provided limited shelter. During the first night, 5 more people died: co-pilot Legara, Francisco Abal, Graciela Mariani, Felipe Macwarin, and Julio Martinez Lamas. The passengers removed the broken seats and other debris from the aircraft and fashioned a crude shelter. The 27 people crammed themselves into the broken fuselage. To try to keep out some of the cold, they used luggage, seats, and snow to close off the open end of the fuselage. They improvised in other ways. Fido Strauch devised a way to obtain water in freezing conditions by using sheet metal from under the seats and placing snow on it. The solar collector melted snow which dripped into empty wine bottles. To prevent snow blindness, he improvised sunglasses using the sun visors in the pilot's cabin, wire, and a bra strap. They removed the seat covers which were partially made of wool and used them to keep warm. They used the seat cushions as snowshoes. Marcelo Perez, captain of the rugby team, assumed leadership. Nando Parado woke from his coma after 3 days to learn his 19-year-old sister Susana Parado was severely injured. He attempted to keep her alive without success, and during the 8th day she succumbed to her injuries. The remaining 27 faced severe difficulties surviving the nights when temperatures dropped to -22 degrees Fahrenheit. All had lived near the sea, most of the team members had never seen snow before, and none had experience at high altitude. The survivors lacked medical supplies, cold weather clothing and equipment or food, and only had 3 pairs of sunglasses among them to help prevent snow blindness. The survivors had extremely little food: 8 chocolate bars, a tin of mussels, 3 small jars of jam, a tin of almonds, a few dates, candies, dried plums, and several bottles of wine. During the days following the crash, they divided this into very small amounts to make their meager supply last as long as possible. Parado ate a single chocolate-covered peanut over 3 days. Even with this strict rationing, their food stock dwindled quickly. There was no natural vegetation and there were no animals on either the glacier or nearby snow-covered mountain. The food ran out after a week, and the group tried to eat parts of the airplane like the cotton inside the seats and leather. They got sicker from eating these. Knowing that rescue efforts had been called off and faced with starvation and death, those still alive agreed that, should they die, the others might consume their bodies in order to live. With no choice, the survivors ate the bodies of their dead friends. The group survived by collectively deciding to eat flesh from the bodies of their dead comrades. This decision was not taken lightly, as most of the dead were classmates, close friends, or relatives. Canessa used broken glass from the aircraft windshield as a cutting tool. He set the example by swallowing the first matchstick-sized strip of frozen flesh. Several others did the same later on. The next day more survivors ate the meat offered them, but a few refused or could not keep it down. Parado protected the corpses of his sister and mother, and they were never eaten. They dried the meat in the sun, which made it more palatable. They were initially so revolted by the experience that they could eat only skin, muscle and fat. When the supply of flesh was diminished, they also ate hearts, lungs and even brains. All of the passengers were Roman Catholic. Some feared eternal damnation. According to Reed, some rationalized the act of necrotic cannibalism as equivalent to the Eucharist, the body and blood of Jesus Christ under the appearances of bread and wine. Others justified it according to a Bible verse found in John 15:13, "No man hath greater love than this, that he lay down his life for his friends." Some initially had reservations, though after realizing that it was their only means of staying alive, they changed their minds a few days later. Javier Methil and his wife Liliana, the only surviving female passenger, were the last survivors to eat human flesh. She had strong religious convictions, and only reluctantly agreed to partake of the flesh after she was told to view it as a kind of Holy Communion. 17 days after the crash, near midnight on 29th of October, an avalanche struck the aircraft containing the survivors as they slept. It filled the fuselage and killed 8 people. The survivors trapped inside soon realized they were running out of air. Nando Parado found a metal pole from the luggage racks and was able to poke a hole in the fuselage roof, providing ventilation. With considerable difficulty, on the morning of 31st of October they dug a tunnel from the cockpit to the surface, only to encounter a furious blizzard that left them no choice but to stay inside the fuselage. The passengers decided that a few members would seek help. Several survivors were determined to join the expedition team. They hoped to get to Chile to the west, but a large mountain lay west of the crash site, persuading them to try heading east first. They continued east the next morning. On the second night of the expedition, which was their first night sleeping outside, they nearly froze to death. After some debate the next morning, they decided that it would be wiser to return to the tail, remove the aircraft's batteries, and bring them back to the fuselage so they might power up the radio and make an SOS call to Santiago for help. A few days later 3 other survivors died. 2 from infected wounds and 1 from starvation, because he refused to eat human flesh. Days later a few passengers decided to leave the crash site. They headed for a mountain peak in another attempt to search for help. On the summit, Parado told Canessa, "We may be walking to our deaths, but I would rather walk to meet my death than wait for it to come to me." Canessa agreed. "You and I are friends, we have been through so much. Now let's go die together." Parado and Canessa hiked for several more days. First, they were able to reach the narrow valley that Parado had seen on the top of the mountain, where they found the source of Rio San Jose, leading to Rio Portillo, which meets Rio Azufre at Matines. They followed the river and reached the snow line. Gradually, there appeared more and more signs of human presence, first some evidence of camping, and finally on the 9th day, some cows. Shortly after they saw some muleteers. They followed them to a small village where they were finally able to contact authorities. When the news broke out that people had survived the crash of Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, the story of the passengers' survival after 72 days drew international attention. A flood of international reporters began walking several kilometers along the route from Puente Negro to Termas del Flaco. The reporters clamored to interview Parado and Canessa about the crash and their survival ordeal. The Chilean Air Force provided 3 Bella 1 helicopters to assist with the rescue. The Chilean military photographed the bodies and mapped the area. A Catholic priest heard the survivors' confessions and told them that they were not condemned for anthropophagy, eating human flesh. Given the in extremis nature of their survival situation, 72 days after the crash 16 people could finally be rescued. 29 died. Only through strong willpower and the pure dedication to survive it was possible to overcome such a situation. Do you think they did the right thing? Would you do the same in such circumstances? Hopefully we will be spared such a misfortune in this day and age, with today's technology. We really hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. Leave a comment below and let us know what you think about the topic. You can also post ideas that we can cover in future episodes. It would be great if you would subscribe to our channel and hit the bell button so you won't miss any new content. If you enjoyed what you saw today, please consider to like the video. If you help us in this way, we can continue to work on interesting mysteries and tragedies. Have a nice and calm night shift. See you next time.